We have 3 weeks into our fantasy football playoffs. We need to be making the right decisions each and every time with our lineup, because if we don't, that could be the difference in if we get the 1 seed or the 2 seed, or if we make the playoffs and miss it. So now more than ever, we need to be making the absolute right decisions. So that's what we're going to try and do on today's video. But without further ado, on the road to 4K, let's get into it. Starting off here with a quick little recap from last Friday's video. Of course, that video blew up, so thank you guys for all the support. But on the left side of your screen, you're going to see a list of names we talked about. And of course, on the right side, if you see a green strip, I'd say we got it right. If you see a red strip, of course, we got it wrong. Nothing in the middle this week. Of course, you can always make the argument. But overall, out of the 12 or so players I gave you guys, I'd say we got about 9 of them right. So I'd say that's pretty good. Starting off here with a matchup in Texas between two young and very fun to watch quarterbacks between C.J. Stroud and of course, Kyler Murray, the returning Kyler Murray. But if you didn't know, these teams are going to be playing this weekend in Houston, and I'd love to start both of these guys in that game if possible. For C.J. Stroud, he's the home team here, of course, but he has piled up 826 passing yards and 7 total touchdowns in the last 2 games combined. He leads the league in passing yards per game, which is around 290 a game, and that is the most by a rookie through 9 games in NFL history. It's safe to say he has a great chance to stay hot this weekend against a struggling Arizona Cardinals defense who have allowed the 8th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this season. For Kyler, on the other hand, as he returned last week after a gruesome knee injury last year, and after a year off, he still managed 17.5 fantasy points, which are like, 17.5 fantasy points is okay, but it's not enough to win me my week. Oh, well, let's take a deeper look into it. Last week, that didn't include a touchdown pass that he threw to Marquise Brown, but Marquise Brown just couldn't pull in. But then on the flip side, it doesn't mention the 1-yard touchdown tush push that John Gannon put Clayton Tune in for Kyler Murray late in that game. So if you add all of that together, right, so the tush push and then let's say Marquise Brown brings that touchdown in, he finishes the game with 28 to 30 fantasy points. He is back to an every week starting option for me at least. And in this game against the Texans, I think this has a chance to be a shootout. So for Stroud and for Kyler Murray, I think both of them stay hot here, and it could be a classic. But how about we dive deeper into the Texans? We kind of talked about it there and how historic of a start C.J. Stroud has been on. But simply put, we talked about it last week, you just have to start all of the main options in this offense until they start to cool down. As again, C.J. Stroud's been off to a historic start. And simply put, it doesn't matter who the matchup is, this offense seems to be matchup proof. So Nico Collins, Devin Singletary, who had a breakout game last week, Dalton Schultz, and Tank Dell, who might be the overall number 1 receiver in this offense. Again, this matchup against the Cardinals this weekend could be a shootout. So I want to start at least all 4 of these guys. I don't know if I want to start Noah Brown this weekend. I'm still up in the air about Noah Brown, even though he's absolutely been a monster the last 2 weeks. I'm just worried about his production when a guy like Nico Collins returns to the lineup. However, for these 4 guys, I think they're must-starts this weekend. Let's talk about another AFC South team in the Jacksonville Jaguars. And I'm going to be sitting some of the biggest options in this offense. And it's not because they're not talented players. It's because of their production. The 3 guys I'm talking about here are Trevor Lawrence, Calvin Ridley, and Evan Ingram. Again, not because of their talent, it's because of their production. All 3 of these guys have underperformed for the majority of the season. And even in this okay matchup this weekend against the Tennessee Titans, I'm sitting all 3 of these guys until they can prove to us that they can not only get this offense back on track, but they can get this offense back on track to the point where they are fantasy relevant. Because at the end of the day, that is what is most important to us fantasy players. I would consider starting guys like Christian Kirk and, of course, your Travis Etienne's of the world. However, as far as these 3 guys, they got to prove something to me before they get back to my starting lineup. I don't know. That's just how I run my fantasy team. But at the running back position, of course, you knew we were going to talk about him. He's on the thumbnail of this video. It is the also frustrating Tony Pollard. And most would say this one's rather simple because he was a 1st or 2nd round draft pick. But I did get this question over on Instagram, which is how I gather these players. Simply put, I'm going to be starting Tony Pollard this weekend, despite the Carolina matchup, which they should be up 100 points on. But last week, when we dive into their blowout win, the Cowboys scored 7 total offensive touchdowns via 6 different offensive players. But Tony Pollard was not one of those players. Instead, Tony Pollard watched his backup, Rashod Rice. He rushed for more yards, and he even scored one of those touchdowns that Tony Pollard did not have. Again, Tony Pollard was a first or second round draft pick in most of your drafts, and he hasn't scored a touchdown since week 1, I believe. It's frustrating. I get it. Luckily, I don't have Tony Pollard. I don't have to deal with these. But I will say to you guys, I just traded for him because I don't believe that his production will remain what it has been. I do believe at some point that he will turn this thing around. But give him one more shot this weekend, as I do think, again, he's playing Carolina, who have allowed the 5th most rushing yards, the most touchdowns, and the 4th most receiving touchdowns to running backs this season. In total, overall, the Panthers have given up the 2nd most fantasy points per game to all positions, right? So a very favorable matchup this weekend. I just think if Pollard doesn't hit here, if he can't hit the ground running, at least getting in the end zone once, we're going to have a real conversation about rest of the season for Tony Pollard. Again, I just traded for him because I don't believe this production is going to stay the same. But also, I want to throw it out there, Rashod Rice, I think is a sneaky play this week. If you're in a bind, let's say if you have Alvin Kamara, Jonathan Taylor, your starting running backs, Rashod Rice might be a sneaky play this weekend, just given the fact that they're going to be blowing the Carolina Panthers out. And just like last week, Rashod Rice is then going to get a lot of touches. But let's talk about a maybe returning Devon Aine. As you see on your screen in the top right, Devon Aine has been dominant this season when he has played, and that might even be an understatement. But he's back, and he might even play this weekend. Again, I doubt it, as they just opened up his 21 return day window. But if he's able to, please do not rush it. Patience is a virtue, and I know Devon Aine is fun, and he's new, and I also know that he only needs 3 to 4 touches to be fantasy relevant, but it's just too risky for me, in my liking, coming off of this injury. Again, just give it 1 week. If he's playing, again, there's a big asterisk with this one. If he's playing, please just give it 1 week and then throw him back into your starting lineup. But another running back I have talked about in basically all of these videos this season, just because he is a polarizing player, is Brian Robinson. And I was shocked to see that he is the RB6 or I think RB8 on the year. Absolutely insane. I did not expect that he would be a top 10 running back. But Brian Robinson has been known as a runner and not a receiver. But last week he kind of changed the narrative. He caught all 6 of his targets for 119 yards and a touchdown. He finished with 28 fantasy points roughly. And of course he was the running back 1 on the week. Insane week for Brian Robinson. They play the Giants this week, who of course just saw Rashod Rice have a pretty good game. But the Giants have allowed the 3rd most rushing yards and the 2nd most touchdowns to running backs this season. I know the Giants just paid Daniel Jones a bunch of money, but I really think they're going after Caleb Williams at this point in the season, so they are not trying to win games. So Brian Robinson, I think the Commanders should get up big and early in this game, and I think Brian Robinson will take over and have a pretty good game. So again, continue to play him down the stretch for these much-needed wins for our fantasy playoff spots. But then James Cook. It's been a frustrating season for Cook managers, as clearly he's the most talented back in this backfield on this roster, but he just hasn't been used like it. Now there's going to be a new play caller, even though Ken Dorsey was doing his job and doing it very well. There's a new play caller here, and he has to manage the trio of James Cook, Latavius Murray, and the returning Leonard Fournette, which we haven't seen quite yet. Not to rhyme, right? Rhyming accidentally. But there's no telling how he's going to be calling the splits in this backfield. He can go fully James Cook, or he can kind of split it down the middle and preserve the bodies if this offense does get it together and make a playoff run. But since week 6, the Jets have allowed the 6th fewest receiving yards to running backs, which is James Cook's specialty, and only 3 total touchdowns to all positions. So this Jets defense is playing crazy right now, is a better way to put it. But James Cook only had 10 fantasy points in week 1, and that was with a full workload where Latavius Murray was an afterthought. But there's a lot more questions now, and Latavius Murray has kind of gotten more and more work over the weeks. To me, play it safe this weekend. It might be a hot take, but start another option if you can over a guy like James Cook going up against that tough Jets defense. But how about his teammate Dalton Kade? I'm going to start him this week, because last week he put up another touchdown and he put up another 15-plus fantasy point game. He has topped those numbers, 15 points, in 4 straight games, and he has quickly become a must-start tight end, arguably in that top-tier category. But there's just no telling, what version of Stephon Diggs we're going to be getting moving forward with his tantrum and his off-the-field tweets. So Dalton Kade, to me, is personally going to be Josh Allen's favorite target going forward, at least until the relationship can be, I guess, fixed between the star players of Diggs and Allen. To me, don't think twice about it. Dalton Kade is a must-start yet again this week. I guess, unless he starts to cool down, don't think twice about it. But how about some receivers here, as we're going to talk about Rashod Rice. This is a guy that you might find on your bench, or you might be flirting with the idea of, he might be my wide receiver too, or my flex play this weekend, depending on your depth. But despite the rough outing in Germany last week, I'm going to continue to start Rashod Rice, as he is the lone wide receiver 1 there in Kansas City, as he leads all of the wide receivers on that offense in all of the major categories, as far as routes, snaps, targets, and then, of course, receptions, receiving yards, basically everything. He leads the Kansas City offense in, of course, if you exclude Travis Kelce. Now, I think Rashod Rice has a great shot to, have a great game this weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles, even though he's going to have the Darius Slay matchup. Now, I know Andy Reid's a great and creative play caller, and he's gonna be getting Rashod Rice the ball against a defense that has allowed the 3rd most yards, the most touchdowns, and the most fantasy points to wide receivers this season. I know Philly seems like a tough defense on paper, but at least for fantasy football, they've been pretty nice to us managers. But I would get it, if Rashod Rice is a questionable play for you. But I would get him in your lineup in this matchup that should be a high-scoring Super Bowl rematch. Plus, who doesn't love a good Monday Night Football play to kind of salvage your week if you're down 10 or so points? But for Adam Thielen, he's the last guy I want to talk about today, as you see by his stats in the top left, it's been quite a rough patch for Adam Thielen, and honestly, that graphic does not do him justice because, again, it's only 2 bad weeks. However, this is strictly based off of his matchup this weekend against Dallas, yet again. But we'll start by saying that Dallas has allowed the 2nd fewest yards to wide receivers, and they've also allowed, hear this out, I found this per Next Gen Stats, the Dallas Cowboys have allowed the 9th fewest yards, the 6th lowest passer rating, and the 2nd lowest completion percentage to slot receivers. Of course, Adam Thielen runs 64% of his routes in the slot for the Carolina offense. So it's not going to be a favorable matchup for Adam Thielen, and I know it's going to be a very hard sit this week if you listen to my, of course, opinion. But if you have another option, I would go there. But again, if you want to start Adam Thielen, go against the grain, just be wary. His floor is extremely low this weekend. But overall, that's going to do it here for today's videos. Again, thank you guys for all of the support as of late. Of course, we're on the road to 4,000 subs. Absolutely insane. This podcast is going up and up and up. And, of course, you guys have shown amazing support along the way. But without further ado, good luck to your fantasy teams this weekend on the road to the playoffs. And good luck to your real-life teams this weekend. Of course, my team just lost to Deshaun Watson. But until Tuesday, another great week in the books. I will see you guys then. Stay happy, stay healthy. Get out of here.